This window was designed and executed by Lauren Peterson, a San Francisco analyst, in honor of the 80th birthday of Joseph L. Henderson. It is a copy in stained glass of one of the illustrations from the Splendor Solis, a 16th century alchemical manuscript. This afternoon, Dr. Henderson will be discussing the 22 plates from the Splendor Solis, relating their alchemical imagery to the analytic process as described by C.G. Jung. The plates are from the San Francisco Center for the Archive of Research in Archetypal Symbolism. Dr. Henderson, a psychiatrist in private practice, is a founding member of the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco.
The manuscript of the Splendor Solis was first known to me when I was doing research at the British Museum in London in 1937, and I've found it very interesting because I was beginning to have dreams at that time. I was still in analysis with C.G. Jung, and I had dreams in color that interested me and seemed not to have much to do with me. And it turned out that these color sequences had a special meaning in alchemy. I knew that Jung was working on alchemy, but I did not know very much about it in those days. And so I did nothing more with it. But many years later, I began to realize how much it represented a kind of metaphor of the work we do in analytical psychology. So I got the slides from the British Museum and started using them as material for teaching at the Jung Institute in San Francisco. I was surprised to find that they had such a good response from my students. Especially, it seemed to help them with practical problems rather than with questions of pure symbolism. This is the first picture. It is the frontispiece. Two men are entering a building through a high arched doorway. One, we are told, is the alchemist, and the other his adept or student. The alchemist is pointing out a sort of banner, bringing into focus a coat of arms of the art. Arma artis, it says, presumably the art of alchemy. This design consists of an old-fashioned, rather small, leaden knight's helmet surmounted by a golden crown and a series of 3 crescent moons on top of that, above which shines a golden sun with human features, with its rays alternating straight and sinuous, spread out in all directions equally, but the lowest of all points downward, as if penetrating the upper crescent moon without actually touching it. Below the helmet is another sun symbol, also with human features, but the impression is as horrifying as the other is benign. The face is covered with pock-like markings, and in each of the eyes and the mouth, another tiny demonic face peers forth. Instead of straight rays, the rays from this sun are like hooks that bend backward upon themselves regressively. The sun is on a shield placed at an angle to the vertical, in contrast to the upper sun, which is symmetrically placed in the center. At first sight, the design appears to be a stereotyped coat of arms with a helmet embellished by several waving plumes and a crest composed of crescent moons. But observing closely, we might say it is a coat of arms in a process of disintegration, with primordial elements tending to replace the old cultural image by a new archetypal image. I took this scene as analogous to the beginning of a therapeutic encounter between analyst and patient. We might say, with the alchemist, There is a healthy son and there is a sick son. The sick son is isolated, distorted, cut off from all relationship and morbidly subjective, suggesting a state of self-doubt and self-loathing. Is this not a true description of a neurosis? The person so affected has been too long protected by an outworn image of heroic overachievement represented by the knight's helmet. You see, these paintings were done in the late 16th century. Alchemy reached its peak, that is, philosophical alchemy reached its peak of meaning in the 17th century. So this is at the high Renaissance at the just before that time. A time when in the humanistic light of the Renaissance there appears then this overprotective or over-aggressive, and as Cervantes had told him, even ridiculous symbol of the knightly chivalric order. It is a true configuration, you might say, of a certain schizoid condition that threatens to become paranoid. This is brought out in the open and, as it were, partially exorcised by being shown in the presence of the healthy son above the helmet. Why is it healthy, and what in this scene is specific? The healthy sun is not alone. It shines by its own light, but is in the correct archetypal relation to the crescent moon below. So it acknowledges the changeable, the related, the vulnerable nature of human life, as well as the positive nature of human will. I saw this as a picture of an outworn persona represented by the helmet, about to be discarded or displaced, and as it were transcended by the golden crown, referring to alchemy as the kingly art. But this is not to be viewed as a unified goal, but as an imaginal union of two complementing opposites, solar strength willingly uniting with lunar rhythm of change. In turn, this whole symbolism might be seen as compensatory to the lower image embodying the raw psychic image of self-doubt to be processed and perhaps healed if treatment can be agreed upon by both therapist and patient as adept. This is really the beginning of the what's called the first treatise, and we see here a man clothed in a red robe with a red cap and a purple outer cloak. In his left hand he holds a long-necked flask, or cucurbit, a glass retort which is 1/3 filled with a yellowish, transparent fluid, partly luminous, and to which he is pointing with his right finger thoughtfully, whilst walking upon the foreground of a beautiful landscape. From the neck of the cucurbit flows a black ribbon upon which is printed in gold letters, "We are seeking the nature of the four elements." What does this mean? It means that presumably the four elements, earth, air, fire, and water, are contained in the alembic in a kind of solution, as if this needed to begin the process of separation, ultimately, of all these different elements. Dreams in early analysis denoting the container suggest the need for psychic containment. Why? Because people are so collectively oriented they do not know how to protect themselves even when they may be strongly motivated to enter into a process of self-discovery. There are two aspects to this. One is the outer aspect of the doubt representing the doubt about being contained in such a process. I often notice that people at the beginning of analysis have dreams of people coming into my waiting room, possibly even into my consulting room, and interfering with our discussions. Sometimes this is so disturbing that the whole room is taken over by this cacophony of externalized comments on what's going on in the dreams of the patient. This simply represents the public opinion in the individual himself. There is no outward interference. Presumably the patient who has come to analysis has freed himself enough to feel that he's going to enter into a private discussion with his therapist. And he's been very careful, for the most part, not to tell anybody he's going to do it because of what people might think. Well, what people might think is reflected by the people in himself, what they might think he is up to when he gets into therapy. And so all the doubts about the process come up immediately, projected into the outer world as public opinion. But there's another doubt about the possibility of therapy, and that is an inner fear. Has nothing to do with outer public opinion. A patient early in analysis, I remember a woman had a dream of a basket she had in her hand, and she stood up and opening it as if to show me what was in it, a cobra jumped out. And she dropped both the cobra and the basket on the floor in great alarm. That told me of an inner fear that she had of what might get out if she allowed herself to be contained in this process. Later, in fantasy, she imagined putting the snake, no longer a cobra, back into the vessel and closing it. From then on, the therapy went very well. In other words, she was able to feel the containment, and the unconscious responded by indicating that the snake, instead of being a poisonous reptile that would kill the process, became, as it were, the guardian snake, or the wisdom of the unconscious that could be contained in the process. The third picture, a knight in dark armor ornamented with gold, with a drawn sword in his hand, and in his left he holds a red banner or shield on which is inscribed in gold letters, "From two waters make one." Eventually, from water make earth, and the stone, meaning the philosopher's stone, will be multiplied. The knight stands upon two fountains with a foot on each. That to the right is surmounted by a little nude figure of a boy, from which runs a black fluid that overflows by a joining conduit into the left fountain, which is also surmounted by a little nude figure of a girl. But from this one runs a golden liquid into the receptacle below, which transmutes by its blending the black stream all into golden water. This fountain overflows and forms a large golden lake, which is seen stretching away in the distance, and around which is seen a village and beautiful landscape. I want you to see the colors of this, because, first of all, you might like to look at the colors of the first one, and then I want you to see the colors in this one, because the knight has on his breastplate stripes of different colors: black, white, yellow, and red. This is the first statement of the alchemical process as represented by colors. Black, white, yellow, and red. The black represents the nigredo, or blackness, with which the process begins, turning into white, which represents a resolution of the blackness and a rebirth or renewal, sense of renewal out of the darkness. The yellow represents a transitional stage from the white, and red represents the final result. Nigredo, albedo, citrinatus, and rubedo are the colors as they're usually described in alchemy. So throughout this process, we are concerned with the transition to be made between these colors. At this stage, it all seems very linear. You see, he's a kind of a symbol of the ego strength that allows the individual to take charge of the situation and decide to do something about it. The knight with his sword suggests the heroic stance of the ego that says, yes, I will do something about all of this containment, and what he is doing is to separate the opposites as represented by the two fountains. The stream of urine from the little boy is yellow, is gray, which means Mercury. Mercurius, he stands for the principle of Mercurius at the beginning of the work. And the urine from the little girl is yellow, which is sulfur, represents sulfur. These are the two opposites that have been separated out of that original containment. One is associated with the dark, one with the light. One might represent the passive, the other the active, one the masculine, one the feminine, one the masculine. It's interesting that the little boy seems to be more on the side of the feminine and the little girl is more on the side of the masculine. And you'll see this paradox running through this whole series. The alchemist did not want to keep this dichotomy of male and female, as we tend to do as artists tend to do, associated with this particular period in art of the High Renaissance. It's as though they wanted to mix the opposites, as they wanted to mix the relationship between people, between masculine and feminine, as if they did not want to keep the dichotomy as fixed as it had been. In other words, this is what would be called a separatio, a separation of the opposites. We see this kind of symbolism in modern dreams continually. The bathroom is the commonest form in dreams of this kind of symbolism, with its washstand, its bath, and its toilet. Water symbolism having to do with this first stage of initiation is woven through the dreams, but personalized in terms of what the individual associates from his own personal experience. This suggests also a kind of a bath of purification needed to, first of all, get rid of impure substances and purify them by others. And this is an initial stage of initiation, which always begins with a kind of water symbolism, a purification by water, a sort of solutio, as a beginning of a stage of transformation, undertaken in the service of the archetype of initiation. The reason I say initiation here is not only because of the of the little boy and little girl who might be said to be at the beginning of a stage of initiation themselves, but by the fact that over the head of the knight there are 7 stars. And in the color, if you look at the colors of of those stars, you see that they are blended. The colors are blended between the dark and the yellow, between the black and the yellow, or gray and yellow, meaning that there is a blending of these two opposites in the 7 stars. Why 7 stars? 7 is traditionally the number associated with initiation as an inner process, something that goes on within the individual to acquaint him with his need for change of the kind that is necessary to take him from one stage of development to another. So this stage is concerned with separation of the two substances and mingling of them together. Psychologically, this symbolism is found in other traditions, such as in the Kundalini Yoga symbolism, where it would be spoken of as the transformation taking place in the region of the bladder, the second chakra, which is experienced as both positive and negative. It could go towards rebirth, or it could go back regressively into and the whole process be devoured. This is true alchemy. At this point, the alchemists recognized what we recognize in our work with patients, that what comes up from the unconscious may be full of promise or full of meaning and then suddenly be devoured and go back again as if it didn't exist. Or else it may go forward and become the next stage. So the initial stage of this transformation is still oriented downward rather than upward. In other words, it is chthonic. So the liquid that is earth-oriented, so that the liquid, like urine, flows outward into everyday life. It's as if, and at this point, the person in therapy would say to himself, and the therapist might say, well, of course, what we are doing is to make your life more livable. And so take your insight and go back and live better than you did before. Supportive psychotherapy, counseling, all the kind of things that we hope that the patient hopes to achieve in making life or his problem less troublesome. But the inner spiritual problem of the opposites then has been stated, and there is the question then of, can he go back? Maybe he has to go forward, and this is the point at which the initiation theme comes into play. And that's why the 7 stars suggest that this process is bound to go forward whether he likes it or not. I remember a dream of my own at an early stage of analysis where I dreamt that there were 2 underground lakes flowing together. I couldn't see them. I just knew they were there. 2 lakes flowing together in a kind of abstract memory, as if I had always known about these lakes, but now they were flowing together. This was associated somehow with my sister, although she didn't appear. And my sister was for me, a kind of anima figure as a boy. She was 8 years older, and I didn't really know her very well at that early stage. But she had red hair and a very fair complexion. And something about her coloring, I think, influenced my unconscious. And so it had to do with the change from white to red, you see, as the anima figure. And the constellation of that, it would be like an initiatory experience in which one could imagine unifying the opposites. The fourth picture represents, on the right side, a king in red and gold robes with a golden crown on his head and standing upon a blazing fire, holding a scepter in his hand with a scroll upon which is inscribed in golden letters, Coagula Masculinum. He is talking to a queen robed in blue and red lining to the dress, holding a blue scroll which says Lac Virginis, inscribed in gold letters, Virgin Lake. Coagula masculinum would mean masculine substance. So there's a contrast between substance and fluidity. She stands upon a dark full moon with both feet over her. Now, there's a question about that. I do not think it is a moon. I think the man who wrote this did not look carefully. Jung indicates that also in his book on alchemy, that this is really earth that she's standing on, not moon. Over her head in the air is a faint silvery sun which has its eyes directed toward the king inquiringly and hopefully. Above his head is a golden red sun which has its eyes directed toward her sorrowfully. Now, what is this? The appearance of human figures indicates progression from the previous imperfect symbol of water as urine to a spiritual water reflected as the Virgin's Lake, the Lac Virginis, the purity of the feminine. Here, instead of raw mercury and sulfur and the opposites so represented, here they are represented by human figures, the king and the queen, as Sol and Luna, sun and moon. They are, however, still standing on bases suggesting their elemental nature, the archetypal dimension. Wherever you see the elements represented pure as earth, air, fire, and water, it refers to the archetypal level of the unconscious, which cannot be seen ordinarily in everyday life. In order to describe to you this picture, I need to read something from Jung because he gives such a good indication of how to understand it psychologically. In his book, Psychology and Alchemy, he is interpreting the dreams of a man, dreams and fantasies, spontaneous fantasies. This man had two dreams at different times, two fantasies at different times. The first one was the following. The veiled woman uncovers her face. It shines like the sun. And he refers to this as the stage in alchemy that is referred to as the solificatio, or awareness of the sun and the influence of the sun. Now, later on in the series of visions, this man had this visual impression of a globe. The unknown woman is standing on it and worshiping the sun. There you see the parallel to our painting here. Is she worshiping the sun? He doesn't look very happy about it, if so. She looks more expectant of what he may be for her than as if she were worshiping him. But still, the parallel, the metaphor follows. Now, what Jung says about this, I think, is very interesting. It helps us understand how this kind of alchemical picture can be seen in a psychological context. The globe probably comes from the idea of the red ball, but whereas this is the sun, the globe is rather an image of the earth upon which the anima stands, worshipping the sun. Anima and sun are thus distinct, which points to the fact that the sun represents a different principle from that of the anima. The latter is a personification of the unconscious, while the sun is a symbol of the source of life and the ultimate wholeness of man, as indicating the solificatio. Now, the sun is an antique symbol that is still very close to us. We know also that the early Christians had some difficulty in distinguishing the rising sun from the figure of Christ. The dreamer's anima still seems to be a sun worshipper. That is to say, she belongs to the ancient world, and for the following reason. The conscious mind, with its rationalistic attitude, has taken little or no interest in her, and therefore made it impossible for the anima to become modernized, or better, Christianized. It almost seems as if the differentiation of the intellect that began in the Christian Middle Ages as a result of scholastic training had driven the anima to regress to the ancient world. So here we have Jung's commentary, which brings in the whole problem of cultural development in the Christian world. He goes on to say, it may not be superfluous to point out here, with due emphasis, that consciously the dreamer had no inkling of all this, but in his unconscious he is immersed in this sea of historical associations, so that he behaves in his dreams as if he were fully cognizant of this curious phenomenon in the history of the human mind. He is, in fact, an unconscious exponent of the autonomous psyche and its development, just like the medieval alchemist or the classical Neoplatonist. Hence one could say, with a grain of salt, that history could be constructed just as easily from one's own unconscious as from the actual texts. This is why I talk about a cultural unconscious, that there is such an awareness of our cultural background that comes to light in people's dreams that is quite separate from both the personal life and the archetypal level of the unconscious. And that statement seems to me to be Jung's verification of that. Well, now, the motto at the top of this picture says particularia, and at the bottom it says via universalis particularibus inclusis, which means a universal way including the particular. Now, that is a difficult thing perhaps to understand, but in the light of our work in analytical psychology, we could easily say that particularia represents the ego with all its personal ramifications into the culture, the specific things that we come up with, and the via universalis, the universal way, represents the way of the self. So it says that this should be seen. At first we might think it's particularia, that it's the personal relationship that's important. And this, in analysis, you see, might also be something we have to take into consideration. There happens inevitably in the course of the early part of treatment in analysis that there is established a transference between the from the patient to the analyst, and possibly a response from the analyst to the patient of a similar kind of countertransference. And the danger at that point is to take this too personally, to think that, aha, I've met my soulmate, and this is where I belong, and we belong together forever and ever, or at least are unified together for the duration of this journey, and it's very personal, very specific. But the alchemist and the analyst, if he knows his work as he should, realizes that this is an illusion. Underneath it is the archetypal base of the whole thing. The elemental level says, no, this is a universal experience. This has happened many times before. It is much bigger than anything that could possibly be understood in a personal context. That helps to explain I think, it helps to explain the expressions on the face of these two figures, the king and the queen. Especially the king looks very upset and anxious about the whole situation. It's as though, whereas she looks very serene, as though she's very well able to know what she's up to, and she holds her hand out to him with great confidence. I think that also says something about this early period of analysis, where one side of oneself feels very competent and very able to take the projections that come and feel we can deal with them, where there's another side that says, how are we going to do this? And will it become very overheated? He's standing on a blazing fire. Will this relationship become so overheated that we won't be able to contain it? Both attitudes are necessary to this stage. The fifth picture represents two men quarrying at a rock and digging for gold. A bronzed crescent moon lies floating in the water on the foreground. Underneath is the word Esther. And below that is the interior of the palace of King Ahasuerus, who is seated on a throne, handing his scepter to the queen. On the top of the picture are two nude figures of children, one holding a bird in his hand, the other, the corner opposite, is feeding another bird. This seems to say that the task of the feminine has become uppermost and is to be contrasted with, and also, to become one with the power of the masculine. This is allegorized in the story of Esther and King Ahasuerus. Esther was a Jewish maiden who was made queen of Ahasuerus when she persuaded him to free her people, the Jewish people, from the dictatorial rule of Haman, and it was the beginning of a festival, the festival of Purim, which is an ancient Jewish festival. The freeing of the Jews from persecution is a metaphor, in this case, for the freeing of the woman to become equal to the man. And this, therefore, is a theme that might very well be recognized today in the light of the women's movement as the wish for men and women to become more partners in their relationships and more recognizing and better able to recognize the mutuality of their experience of each other. The analytical interpretation of this is clear from the picture itself. They are working through, which is represented by digging, which symbolizes what we mean by the term depth psychology. With this beginning, we then dig. The patient has to bring up more material, has to find more material from the earth, that is, from the unconscious. And presumably with the help of the therapist, is able to do so. This is what Jung would have called to some extent, the reductive phase of analysis, digging back into the earth to find the origins of life and presumably the origins of what has gone wrong with life, the neurosis, the origin of the neurosis, and the possibility of finding a buried treasure. In other words, it is not just digging back for the sake of tidying things up and saying if you'd had a better mother or father, all would have been well. It's digging back deeper than that. It's regression in the service of the self, not just of the ego. And that is why it speaks of a buried treasure that might be unearthed. So not all regressions are painful. They may be rewarding in the end. Now this is another version of the same task, but here the emphasis is upon growth as the central symbol of the represented by the tree. You will see that it's a very glowing picture. The tree has a golden crown around it, showing that this is the tree of the philosophers, as so to speak, and a man is climbing up on a ladder with 7 rungs. So here again is the reference to the number 7. So here the initiation that was suggested in that early picture becomes a more effective way of reaching higher consciousness. He is climbing up to into this tree. There are golden fruits on the tree, and there are some golden branches that he is reaching down, handing to these 2 priestly figures. The birds are black and white, as presumably they are in a stage of transition from black to white. So we have here our typical alchemical color symbolism of the movement from the nigredo to the albedo, as birds flying, so that there is a spiritual movement here that is quite different from that earlier idea of the process going back into life. Here it is ready to find a higher level of meaning. And the figure on the ladder is presumably, though keeping in touch with what's below. He is not just flying off into thin air. He is concerned with bringing down the golden branches and giving them to whoever these people are. I have no idea who they are. Some sort of priestly figures. They might be analysts. Who knows? But something else is happening in this picture, which is that there's a river flowing from the tree, and it's flowing into this palatial building. It looks like as though it were like boxes at the opera, and here's the stage, and 4 naked women are bathing. The men are in the wings. They are hiding. These men are actually hiding so that they won't be seen. And up above, they're looking down like peeping toms to see these women in their bath. One of them is a king, in fact. So it says that the whole principle of masculinity and kingship is in abeyance in terms of the new appearance of the feminine, no longer as a purely archetypal figure, but as real women in a setting that completely acknowledges them as open to the world, about which they have no need to feel ashamed of themselves. And so what does this mean psychologically in terms of analysis? It would mean that the transference, perhaps, or countertransference, has gone further in relation to this process, and now the analyst and the patient are can become much more comfortable with the situation, as though it were now something to be enjoyed instead of suffered. And this often happens, that there comes a period where the interchange and the things that are brought up from the unconscious via the anima if it's a man, via the animus if it's a woman, become it becomes an opportunity for learning and for experiencing life in a much more intimate way than we are usually able to do in everyday life. The seventh picture represents a queen or young king draped in ermine and gold embroidered robe, loose and flowing, holding in right hand a scepter surmounted by 7 golden stars. Here are our stars again, 7 of them. And in the left, a golden ball. In the middle distance, a king is seen swimming or drowning in the sea and reaching his arms out as if for help to save his life. A golden sun shines overhead, throwing its rays downward toward the queen. To the sun's left is a luminous star surmounted by a golden halo, which is also directing its rays toward the king or queen. The margin is in gold with butterflies, strawberries, birds, and flowers. At the base are 2 small intaglios, like bluish-gray pictures. That to the left represents a man naked and striking with a bludgeon a woman who is sitting on the ground alongside a satyr. Both of these are holding up their arms to ward off the blow. A tree grows by their side. That to the right is very similar, only there is a 4th male figure who is standing up and tries to stay the man with the bludgeon from striking the other 2. The landscape is very beautiful. Golden tipped flowers peer above the foliage. This picture represents the death and regeneration of the old king as son, becoming crowned anew as a youthful figure who has a kingly nature rather than a worldly position. I want to read you something about this from a book by Edinger called The Anatomy of the Psyche. He has done an excellent study of alchemy, and he says of this that it represents the stage of alchemy represented by the solutio, the period at which it is possible to dissolve the old in favor of the new. The old king, therefore, represents the outworn old personality, that which is old and outworn in us, the senex, the eternal senex that we tend to forget about until we run up against it. Our conventional attitudes, our habits, even our loyalties are sometimes represented as old and outworn. And this king is therefore suffering from dropsy. The king says, "I demand the water which is closest to my heart and which likes me above all things." When the servant brought it, the king drank so much that all his limbs were filled and his veins inflated, and he himself became discolored. He says, "I am heavy and my head hurts me, and it seems to me as though all my limbs were falling apart." And so then he dies. In other words, he dies from too much water. Now, what does that mean psychologically? It would say that what is felt as a symptom of this is that the unconscious begins to rebel against this fixed idea of maintaining the kingly position of consciousness, and is taken over in spite of itself. This would be the period in analysis when people begin to have uncomfortable dreams about floods and rain coming down and the roof leaking and too much water. Too much of the unconscious is beginning to seep in. They don't know what to do with it all. This is a moment when the analyst can become worried too, as to wonder how he's going to keep the process afloat and not have it sort of drown in the midst of things. Jung's comment on this text is as follows: the king personifies a hypertrophy of the ego, which calls for a compensation. His thirst is due to his boundless concupiscence and egotism, but when he drinks, he is overwhelmed by the water, that is, by the unconscious. As I was saying, the figure of the young king or queen, whatever it is, it does seem very young. And one of the things that interests me is that it seems that the gown she is wearing is too big for it, and 3 crowns on its head. It has a lead, silver, and gold tiered crown. This, to me, means that the dual principle of male and female, as represented earlier on by the king and queen, has now become a Trinitarian symbol, represented by the triple crown. So that there has taken place, so to speak, an evolution of consciousness from silver to gold. Lead would stand for the prima materia, of course. A white bird surmounts the golden fruit as a symbol of what? The feminine soul, the spiritual aspiration. We don't know. It's a pure symbol for the of achievement, however, where the white is well established, the albedo. The intaglios simply represent the removal of feminine guilt. A man is beating up another man who's causing trouble to a woman, especially about her sexuality. And so, again, it's that idea of redemption of the feminine, which is also redemption of the unconscious in relation to the conscious process. Now we go on. The next picture is called The Regeneration of the Ethiopian. Depicts a queen with angel's wings. She has a golden crown and neck ornaments, golden chains, yellow sleeves, and skirt and dress ornamented with flowing green foliage. From her left shoulder hangs a blue drapery with golden edges. In her hand she holds a crimson robe edged with gold, and so forth. She is holding this crimson robe, to a naked black man who is standing to the knees in a black mud pool. His left arm is white and slightly soiled. His right arm, neck, and head is blood red. He holds his right hand over his right thigh as if to cover his nakedness. He stands with his right side toward us, and on the profile is seen a circular transparent glass globe, just covering head, all but profile. Through this globe are to be seen on the organ of self-esteem, the right cheekbone, and over the right eye, 3 luminous spots, in each of which is seen a small red cross. The queen seems to be encouraging and sympathizing with him. Here, the feminine principle becomes fully manifest as a saving grace to rescue the masculine principle from contamination with the inferior side of life, what we would call psychologically the inferior function. It seems to me this is a metaphor for the appearance of that which has never been cultivated, and which however seems to represent the greatest potential for growth, something that has to be redeemed from the unconscious, much more profound than what was represented by the old king in the previous painting. If you think of that previous painting about the old king and the young king, I think you can see that it is as if that picture of the young king is a bit inflated. It's as if to say, too good to be true, that the old king dies and then the young king is all fully ready for the spiritual adventure. But he isn't. It's as if to say, and this is a period in analysis that we all recognize, I'm sure, where people become inflated with the success that they have felt so far, with what has been redeemed so far from the unconscious. But they are not aware that there still may be a deeper level that has to be explored to find out a deeper and more essential cure for what. And this represents actually the Ethiopian is a figure that appears very often in alchemy, representing a new and a more essential problem about the nigredo, or blackness. But you see, he's got all the colors of the alchemy. He's black, white, and red. And so it's like saying that the process is going on from black to white to red, but it comes up out of the mud now, and not just drowning in the water, but earth is mixed up in it, and he's going to have to be helped. He can't do anything for himself. This is so true of the inferior function. The conscious cannot do anything about this directly, about bringing up the inferior function, without help from a guardian spirit of some kind. And the woman here represents the guardian spirit, the queen, who is also a kind of angel. The wings suggest then that that white bird in the previous picture has now taken shape and form and has become a fully developed anima figure, if it's for a man, a fully developed figure of the feminine of the feminine self for a woman. She has a star over her head of 6 points, which points to the supremacy of the feminine principle in its existing in its own right, whether it represents the feminine self for women or the spiritual anima for men. In that previous one, you see the 3 crowns suggest that very nice to have 3 instead of 2, but it's an unbalanced number and lacks the 4th dimension. So, this man is the 4th function, this unregenerate Ethiopian, so to speak, that needs a totally new treatment as initiation experience, which includes the shadow side of life. Now we go on. The 9th picture, standing in the foreground of a magnificent Claude-like picture, is an exquisitely formed figure of a man dressed in black with golden edging and cross button bars of red and gold in front. He has 2 heads and necks. One, a man's with sandy hair and blue eyes, without beard or mustache. The other, a beautiful female face with blue eyes and fair or reddish hair. A golden emanation or halo radiates from the man's head, while a silvery radiation proceeds from the female. His face is to the left of the picture, but to her right, and his profile overlaps the back part of her head. He has attached to the right shoulder a crimson wing, and she a faint purple white wing. In the left hand he holds a golden egg upon which are both intent upon. And in his right he holds a circular shield, the edge of which is circled with gold. The inner circle next a grayish mottled or marbled appearance containing an inner circle of some kind of picture of a tiny landscape, a sort of as it might be seen through a double concave glass in a tube. Clearly, we have here a reference to the total union of masculine and feminine principles in a version of the hermaphroditic image. The red wing on the man's side and the white wing on the side of the woman refers to a meeting of the albedo and the rubedo, which is known in alchemy sometimes as the red man and his white wife. The 4 elements are contained in the symbolic egg. The egg is said to have an outer shell, which is earth, an inner membrane, which is air, water containing air, and the central yolk is the fire. So it contains the 4 elements: earth, air, water, and fire. So it's a symbol of the totality of the unconscious. The And that is presumably the growing point, the promise of future development. In contrast to that, the picture on the other side suggests a kind of macrocosm. If the egg is the microcosm, the inner man, the landscape would represent the macrocosm, which is the outer world. And so to speak, this is then a place at which both the inner and the outer are thought to come together in the symbolism of the hermaphrodite. So, a new synthesis has been reached. If we ask what this means psychologically in the course of analysis, it probably suggests the feeling of the sense of having a feeling that there is some kind of resolution of the original problem, some possibility of unification. The self then would be symbolized by the hermaphrodite, where the opposites that were separated in that earlier stage are now brought together. What this means in terms of the therapeutic relationship between the patient and the doctor is anybody's guess. You have to think of it as unique in every situation. There is no rule for what happens. Presumably something happens that makes them feel that the transference, counter-transfer situation is being somehow honored in the right way. So then we might think, well, this is the end of the process. What more? The analysis is a success, and all we have to do is just tidy things up a bit and send the patient on his way. However, this is not the end. And so the next picture represents a ferocious, villainous man with wild, disheveled black hair, clothed in red with an outer garment of white shaded with pale purple, having drawn a sword in his right hand. In his left he holds the golden head of a fair, beautiful, skinned corpse of a man, which lies at his feet, freshly mutilated. The arms and legs are separated fresh and clean, showing the clear red flesh freshly cut. This scene is represented in the open grounds attached to a palace. A river runs past on which are plying gondolas. Castles and fine mansions are seen in the distance as when Venice was in her glory, a city of palaces. Several people are strolling and lingering on the grounds within view, but these are oblivious to the scene here depicted. Some golden tips are to be seen on the green foliage. At the base underneath are seen two small golden pictures. One on the left represents a king driving 4 river horses, behind which a female figure in a boat holding 2 reins, which are attached to the horses, and thus is the boat driven along. The picture to the right represents a female in a boat holding a 3-pronged fork or trident in her right hand, with reins in the left hand guiding 3 river horses. A satyr and 2 females are going on before. The 2 more coming up behind. The latter, sits on the back of a merman. So the presumed union of opposites that took place in the last picture seems not to be final. The hermaphroditic image is always troubling in the sense that it's very hard for us to imagine how it would be possible to be both man and woman at the same time in the same body. In fact, impossible. And so it's a point where the opposites, instead of being unified, have come too close together for comfort. Although there should be a union, it is not quite the right symbol. And therefore, in order for it to become the true symbol, it has to be separated again. Another separation needs to be undertaken. And this is represented then by this dismembered body. So we see then that the hermaphrodite is an imperfect or premature image of the self, not a final image, but at all. This frequently occurs in analysis, especially of intuitive type individuals who respond too easily to the possibility of reaching the goal before they are realistically ready for it. But the unconscious statement of this possibility is nevertheless useful, even necessary, to prevent the individual from getting stuck. Here the individual is alone with his or her darkest fear, the fear of dissociation. But although the body itself is totally dissociated and the shadow fellow has seemed to take over, he is saving from this destruction the golden head, which is saved and protected from what? What is dissociation all about? It seems to me it's the fear of madness, the fear of the collective, the fear of what the individual has been so in need of protection from all through the process of thinking that he is at the mercy of all those disturbing forces from the unconscious that affect society in general. It's referred to somewhere as the worldly wantons. The head, the golden head, must be protected from the worldly wantons. And so again, the danger of the collective comes in. Here, the danger of the collective unconscious. And at crucial points in depth psychotherapy, a fear of madness may be necessary, in fact, to ensure that we know fully how valuable true consciousness is in a psychological sense, and that ritual dismemberment, so characteristic of shamanism, is a close relation to therapy. This certainly does not mean that our patients should become shamans, or that we should be shamans either, but that we recognize that the shamanistic model, the shamanistic image, is naturally one that may come to light in the course of treatment. And that is represented by a literal physical dissociation of parts so that they can come together on a more effective level. So the 11th picture, we see in a courtyard of a magnificent palace, and under a corridor is a circular furnace on which, in an iron vessel or copper boiler filled with water, there is a naked man with red skin, breast high. On his head stands a dove with outspread white wings, shaded blue. A man is blowing at the furnace with a pair of bellows very intently and anxiously. His inner garment is red, his nether garment blue, his coat black and edged with blue. The whole figure betrays the workman. Two figures are observed on a distant raised corridor. One, a female dressed in red and carrying a flask in her hand. The other, a man dressed in purple and looking toward the man in the hot bath. Alongside of the workman is a retort of glass, tongs, and coals for fire. In two niches in the wall are to be seen figures of Mercury and Jupiter. At the base or pedestal of a column is an intaglio or bas-relief of Vulcan working as a blacksmith, with an assistant having his arm raised with hammer as if assisting. My reference to shamanism about the last picture is suggested here by the presence in the intaglio of the, or base of the pedestal, the intaglio or bas-relief of Vulcan. Hephaestus is the Greek term for the great shaman, blacksmith of Greek mythology. You know, he was the Hephaestus was thrown out of Olympus. His mother didn't like him because he was crippled, and so he was thrown out and had to fend for himself apart from the rest of the gods. But he made beautiful jewelry by knowing how to be creative with metals, and so his and of how to transform base metals into valuable things. So he stands for that shamanistic ability to bring illumination and beauty out of what would otherwise be chaos. That's only a very slight part of this picture, but I think it's sort of an important one because we just had the negative side of that, which is represented as a dissociation. And here, instead of a dissociation, there's a suggestion. Here, the figure of Hephaestus pulls it all together again, but in a very real way, as with fire and the anvil. The main thing, however, is the the new integration has now gone further. This picture largely explains itself as representing the culmination of the evolutionary process by which the objective psyche becomes fully manifest or aware of itself. It is nothing less than complete transformation of the whole person by a method of similar to alchemy, whereupon the white bird, which we saw earlier perched on the golden fruit of that kingly image, is now perched on the head of an ordinary human being. What was formerly merely the wish is now the attainment of a humanly grounded spiritually attitude, because the man is not flying himself, he is still in the pot, being transformed. But the bird has come up. Now you might think that that bird flew down from above and sat on his head, but that is not the alchemical symbol. The alchemical symbol is that the work done in the chthonic or earthly level released the white bird, which flew up. So it's just the reverse of what we might expect with our Christian background of thinking that all spiritual enlightenment comes from above. In other words, the principle of revelation. The principle of alchemy is just the opposite. It says that salvation does not come from above, it comes from an evolutionary process from below. And then that is what brings out the white bird. It is represented this way, and of course this stands for whatever you want to call the white bird, the soul maybe. Edinger speaks of this as the white soul, anima candida. At the end of the sublimation, there germinates through the mediation of the spirit a shining white symbol, which flies to heaven with the spirit. This is clearly and manifestly the stone, the philosopher's stone. The white soul is often represented by a white bird being released from the material being heated. One picture shows a man being cooked in the water bath with a white bird emerging from his head. That is this one. A parallel to this picture is found in many other examples, one of which I will show you, the sublimatio, where you can see the crude material, the chaos below, with the bird flying upward. In the alembic, so that it says, this did not come down from above, it arose out of the chaotic material of the unconscious. This is what is called an increatum, something that was not created by God, but created by the human being in the depth of his suffering. He brings it out and makes it available for not just higher consciousness, but for the whole of his life. So that finishes this series, and now we will break and meet later on.